Well, welcome to Voice of San Diego, a special town hall on education and on schools that are sort of open and schools that are emerging to help parents and teachers in different ways and students. It is quite an interesting discussion and one that once we announced, we had so much interest in that we are glad to do our best to advance the conversation. My name is Scott Lewis. I'm the CEO and editor-in-chief of Voice of San Diego. Thank you so much for joining tonight, where I'm so glad to see so many members of Voice of San Diego who make the service possible here. And thanks to everybody who's new. These crises, the crisis of public trust, the crisis in the economy, and of course the public health crisis, have introduced Voice of San Diego to a very large number of new readers that we're doing our best to connect with. But just quickly, Voice of San Diego focuses on both helping people understand public affairs in San Diego so that they can be active participants, so that they understand things like how school board elections work or what the Port of San Diego is, or all those things. And then the second and very important part of our mission is to do investigative reporting. So to find out things that people sometimes don't want us to find out, or just to explain why San Diego is the way it is in so many parts of its education, its politics, its government, its business, and its environment. If you are so moved after this, we'll provide ample opportunities for you to continue following these kinds of conversations about San Diego. I wanted to make clear first that these kind of events aren't possible without members like you, people who donate and make this possible. We have about 3,000 donors, each of whom are individually responsible for making so much of this work, this investigative work and explanatory work possible. So thank you. And it is also not possible without sponsors and supporters like San Diego Gas and Electric, who's here tonight. So joining us right now is John Jenkins. He's the Vice President of Electric Systems Operations at SDG&E. And he's going to say a few words about the company and what they're doing.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Scott, and thank you, Voice of San Diego, for having me. As you all know and have likely seen from the Voice's coverage, the pandemic has placed an extraordinary strain on our education system. The emergence of COVID-19 has further highlighted educational inequities, such as the digital divide, that have existed long before this pandemic. Now, with the need to maintain physical distance, schools are forced to go virtual, and the vital safety net provided by schools has disappeared for many students and families. Personally, I have two kids, an 8th grader and a sophomore in our public school system. In addition to that, my wife is a high school English teacher at Del Norte High School. And also someone who served on boards of organizations that help underserved and first-generation college students realize their dream of going to college. Education is very important in our family, to myself as well. It's also personal to all of us at SDG&E. The majority of our 4,200 employees are parents and caregivers that have children across the 42 school districts in our region. Like a lot of employers out there, SDG&E is navigating how we can best support our employees who are juggling work while supporting their kids' education at home. We've had numerous town halls and conversations with employees. Far and away, the number one topic that has come up is dealing with kids at home, their education, work-life balance with people working from home. But it's even harder for our field employees who don't have the option to work from home and have their children with technology and virtual learning. And I think about our customers who are all in the same boat. It's not just the employees at our company. So yes, we're all in this together, which is why SDG&E is proud to sponsor this very important event. We partner with over 100 nonprofit organizations throughout the San Diego STEM ecosystem to support and provide resources to families and communities. In the coming weeks, we will be launching our support for teachers and STEM projects through Donors Choose, an online crowdfunding platform for teachers. Teachers can post their requests for classroom projects, and SDG&E will match public donations. Not only are we going to match, but we're going to provide $2 to every $1 match for schools in select disadvantaged communities. As an electrical engineer, father, and husband of a public school teacher, I know firsthand the importance of education and what it can do to change lives and transform our society. I want to thank the Voice of San Diego for hosting this very important virtual town hall on this very important topic. And thank you for the time here. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Scott.
All right. Thank you so much, John. Appreciate it. And your support again makes this possible. So, yeah, I believe as well, this is a historic moment for public education. We will either look back at this time with pride about having forged a better, maybe more flexible future, maybe perfected some of the ways that parents and teachers and students can communicate, or we'll look back with shame about the distance that we've created between people and the loss of or the exasperation of inequities that exist. So this is a very important conversation, and our Will Huntsberry has led that. Thank you to John and Estugini for putting it on. Okay, we do have an ulterior motive for doing tonight's event. We are trying to understand the best technologies that are out there for hosting not only events like this, streaming services, but also for convening people in a new way. At the end of September, we will have our annual PolitiFest, which is a week-long, September 29th through October 3rd, week-long series of debates about everything from the mayor's race to school boards to hopefully Congress and a bunch of other things that we're putting together, panel discussions, a whole week. You can pick and choose what you want, but we need a centralized place for that. And that's why it was so important. And we want to thank you so much for going through the registration process many of you went through. If you have any questions, you can post them here in the comments in the chat section of this YouTube screen. We will see those. Also, at the end, Will and I will break off to host different conversations. Will's probably going to continue on with some of the discussions about equity and some of the divides that may be exasperated by what's happening now. And I will continue to have a discussion about some of the actual logistics of what's happening right now, what opportunities are available, what do we know and don't know about schools and the virus and all those things. So you can pick your different outlet, and we'll help you find those if you need it. If you haven't already done so, take a minute to complete your personal profile in there. That'll help. If you guys have ideas you want to share, you want to talk amongst parents or amongst teachers, you can complete your profile. That would help. These sessions will be recorded so that we can share them with more people after today. And so for now, I'm going to transfer it to my friend and our colleague, Will Huntsberry. Will, it's all yours now, buddy. Your background is looking a lot better these days. Thank you.
Yep, I got rid of the hostage wall. You know, I wanted to give people something better, just in case like someone screenshots it one day and makes fun of me. Really.
Right. Well, good luck, and thank you for leading the conversation.
Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone who is here, including the 200 of you who signed up for this event. That's so awesome. And thank you to our awesome panelists who are going to be talking with me this evening about schools. We've got some great people. We've got Betzy Lynch, who works with the Jewish Community Center, and she's going to be working on starting a full-day camp for students in the fall. So they will have an option for places to go and be helped with their learning. We've got Alex Stein, and he runs Tutors and Friends. So he's working with families who are trying to start pods right now. Then we also have Richard Barrera. He's vice president of the San Diego Unified School Board. Hi, Richard. Obviously, he's going to talk to us about what the district's doing and what it can do to help overcome the equity gaps that I think will start to emerge. And lastly, we have Dr. Tyrone Howard, who I'm thrilled to have with us. He is a professor of education at UCLA, and he runs the Black Male Institute there. And so he's going to help us understand what this new landscape actually means for kids. So yeah, let's get right into it. Let's see. I want to start with you, Betzy. So like I mentioned, you are starting so I want to ask you, why did you feel like you needed to do that, and what exactly will that camp look like?
Sure. Thanks, Will, and thanks to everyone for inviting me to be a part of the conversation this evening. At the Lawrence Family Jewish Community Center on the Jacobs Family Campus here in La Jolla, we've been hosting our summer camp program for 75 years. And in the moments leading up to and prior to when our facility closed, there was great uncertainty of whether we would be able to welcome the hundreds and hundreds of children from all over San Diego County that we bus to our campsite during the summer, if we would make that happen. Needless to say, camp was a very, very different version of itself this summer under COVID guidance. The groups were in small pods of 10 to 12. There was no intermingling with the groups, but we were successfully able to serve the needs of over 300 children on our site and with some partners throughout the county through the summertime. And when it started to appear that school would not open in the traditional sense that it would, my leadership team, that includes both our volunteer leaders from the board as well as our staff team, really started to look at the impact that this would cause for our community. When we started building with a program that we call All Day with the J, we were thinking that it was going to be a hybrid program, that the kids would be on campus a couple of days a week with appropriate social distancing, and that they would be here a couple of days a week when their parents of essential workers needed to go to work, that we would help fill the gap for the care of those children. As we were vetting what and how we could go about this and formulating an email to send out to the families that were currently engaged in our camp program, this is when we learned that more than likely distance learning would be in store for everyone. And upon my own reflection, I really started to consider not only who this would affect in terms of the essential workers that we had been serving through this entire time where they needed to go to work and their children needed to be at camp, and in particular, what this would do to women. As a female leader, I know that 9 times out of 10, when families that have dual working parents have to make a choice between who's going to stay at home, more often than not, it's mom. And I felt as a female leader, I had to do my part in whatever wide net that I could cast to make sure that women's place in the workforce would not be set back by 2 decades by the fact that we were in a global pandemic. And while the work of the JCC at this time is really more about depth rather than breadth because of the numbers that we can really serve are limited, we knew we had a responsibility to our community to step up and do the very best that we could. And that's why we made this choice.
Right. Yeah, it's obviously an unprecedented time, and you're not the only one in the community who's having to come up with solutions for exactly how we're going to manage this, where students will be. So how many kids do you envision serving, and how many adults will be working with them? How much like school is it going to be like? You know, we're seeing all these kind of school-like options come up.
Yeah.
How much will All Day at the J be like school?
So I want to be really clear that All Day at the J isn't going to be like school. For us, what All Day at the J will be like camp. And what it will include as part of their activity is distance learning. And what we're trying to navigate is in enrollment that we have for the essential workers that we're serving right now, which roughly now is a little over 160 children. That's really what we can fit safely into the building with appropriate social distancing and by pods, by grades. What we found is that within that framework, there's like 20 different schools within that group of kids. So in each of our little grade pods, there'll be 10 to 12 kids with 2 pod leaders that will help them navigate their online learning schedules. And then when their online learning is complete, we're going to focus on what I call the hidden curriculum of school. It's the things about how to sit in a chair and follow, more than one step instructions. It's how to share with your friends appropriately. It's how the social emotional needs of the children. And most importantly, physical activity, being outside, using your outside voice, and getting to be a kid. More than anything right now, these children need each other, and they need us as adults to recognize their social and emotional needs as much as they have academic needs. And that's really what the JCC is intending to serve at this time.
Right. And obviously, that's one of the things that I've been hearing the most is that parents are concerned about the socialization that students get and the social, emotional wellness they get, the development they get from being with their friends. I want to ask Alex a question now as we're just describing the landscape of all these private options that will be available to people. So we heard about Betzy, we heard about day camps from Betzy, but Alex, you run a tutoring company and you've been talking to a lot of families who are interested in starting pods. So what are you hearing from them? What are you hoping to provide them?
So thanks for having me on. I just want to say, Betzy, that was very inspiring, everything that you said. Tutoring has been a normal part of academics for a long time, but generally it's for students in middle school or older. And it's only in recent times that younger students, elementary, first grade, kindergarten, are needing this group style tutoring because the classroom environment is so psychologically beneficial for them. We've had a lot of parents suggesting that the student won't listen to them when they ask them to do their assignments, or they just don't have the ability to focus. And when they're in that classroom environment working with other students, there's a competition factor and a sort of reinforcement of learning that helps them stay on track. And so we've gotten a ton of requests from parents of younger students to have one of our tutors come and lead them in a pod style group. One of the expectations is that a tutor can come and actually teach the curriculum and not just provide them answers to whatever packet they've been sent home for the week. So our expectations for our tutors is that we can set them up with or for the parents that we'll be working with, is to set them up with a teacher-like experience so that at home in a safe environment, the students can get the same type of experience that they would have at school. And as you know, the pandemic is changing academics as we know it. So it's going to be quite an adventure. It's going to be a learning curve for both the parents, the students, and the tutors. But it's absolutely it's absolutely something we can accomplish as a society, and I think we'll come out better overall.
And so what's the interest level in terms of people calling you? I think you mentioned you've run a tutoring company for a long time, but this is the first time you'll be working with younger kids. Does that change the game for you, trying to get tutors set up to work with young kids instead of, you know, a freshman struggling with algebra?
Absolutely. In the past, most of our tutors are experienced with working with middle school and high school age students. Recently, we've started taking on people that are more accustomed to working with younger students, and it's definitely changing the game. In the past, tutoring wasn't something that was very big for younger students just because the material wasn't that difficult as far as what they're learning in school. But now it's a completely different type of thing in which they're not necessarily being tutored, but they're being taught by somebody who's an academic professional. And yes, it's changing the game entirely. We've had more influx of, we've had more requests for tutoring for young students than we've ever had in the past. And so these pods have become incredibly popular, and it makes perfect sense. All the parents that I've spoken with have talked about how having that interaction between the peers in the classroom is really, it makes all the difference for these younger students, kindergarten through 4th grade, even up to 5th and 6th grade. And it does in the high school environment as well. It's just not as big of a deal because the students are more used to holding themselves accountable with the material. Whereas at these younger levels, they need someone there in front of them sounding out the words, writing the things down. You know, it's difficult to learn those fundamentals when you're sitting at a computer screen, and one, having to pay attention for hours at a time, and two, not having somebody to directly interact with and ask questions. You know.
So Richard, I want to ask you something, and Dr. Howard, don't worry, we're getting to you next. But you know, so Richard, you're a school board member. What are you thinking when you're hearing about all these different options that are springing up? You know, how do you think that's a good thing? How will the school district and the online learning that will be provided interact with those things, do you think?
Well, so first of all, our online learning is the curriculum, and you know, and the live interaction that students have with their teacher, you know, is what we are focused on in terms of the primary way that students are learning and will be learning. The degree to which we can work with efforts outside of the school system, is something that, we're certainly open to, and we want to have those conversations. I would say that the first thought that occurs to me, and, so 2/3 of the students in our district live in poverty. I represent the portion of the district that are sort of the schools and neighborhoods that feed into San Diego High School and Hoover High School. And, so I wonder about the degree to which we as a system could potentially facilitate, parents being able to come together in similar ways, to what we're hearing about now. Is, can we systematically help organize, families into pods, to potentially partner with organizations that may be able to provide tutoring. Our connection with the community-based organizations that serve our kids and families, particularly in our high poverty communities, has never been as important. And, so as these types of ideas start to, develop, my first thought, Will, is really how do we, as a system, potentially provide support for these types of models while we're in a, situation that that our schools are physically closed. Obviously, our number one focus is get distance learning right when we start the school year, and our priority right next to that is how do we start providing for reopening our schools when it's safe, and how do we go through identifying which students most need to be back at school first in a process of phased reopening. But to the extent that this crisis drags on, which none of us want, but we have to be prepared for, I think, what we want to do is learn maybe from some of these examples that we're talking about now, and, think about that systematically.
Right. And so I want to ask you in a minute, Richard, about what more the district can do. But first I want to go to Dr. Howard. Dr. Howard and I spoke last week for a story I was working on about some of these private options. We're hearing this rise in all these options that will be available, lots of them for a fee, unfortunately. And, it's not a surprise that parents are coming up with new ways to get their children to socialize. But Dr. Howard, what do you think the impact could be in the rise in all these fee-based school-like options?
So first and foremost, thanks for having me on, Will. I think this is an important conversation. So I think there's an elephant in the room here that needs to be discussed. And I think Board Member Herrera touched upon it briefly, but I want to go a little bit deeper. I think what this proliferation of learning pods, that most of which I understand are based on fee for participation, is only going to create deeper inequities that already exist in our communities. Not only will these inequities be even widened, but I think what we also have to talk about is the racialization of these inequities. We know that in Southern California and in San Diego in particular, the majority of the students who are in San Diego schools are students of color. The disproportionate number of those students who are Latinx, African American, and Asian Pacific Islander are more likely to be poor than their counterparts. So when we talk about what the implications will be, what the ramifications are, what we're going to see is more Black and brown children who we have fought for years to try to create more equitable opportunities to learn. We will see much of that progress beginning to erode because many families may not have the means and the resources to participate in these different types of learning opportunities. Now, I want to be clear about this. By no means do I begrudge those parents who have the means and have the wherewithal to provide these opportunities for their children. That's their responsibility, that's their obligation, and they have the privilege and they have the means to do so. But what I do begrudge is a system that allows this kind of inequity to happen. What I do begrudge is a system that sees the inequities, know that they exist, but yet we still don't rally around them collectively to do something different, to say we're not going to allow some students to have opportunities, but yet others will be on the outside looking in. Because when it's all said and done, when we are beyond this COVID moment, hopefully all these students will come back to a place called school. And what will be more evident at that point in time is that the students who are able to participate in these learning pods were able to not only benefit socially, emotionally, and academically, but they will also continue to thrive. Whereas other children, many of whom will be Black, brown, and poor, will have fallen farther and farther behind, yet they will compete on the same tests, apply for the same colleges, compete for the same jobs. And so what you may see is years of regression that students may have experienced in terms of their academic pursuits. So I think we have to think collectively. We have to think about sort of structural inputs where our cities and our counties can be much more creative and innovative, and more importantly, insistent on ensuring that the same opportunities that we know more affluent families have, that poor children have those same opportunities.
Yes, I obviously couldn't have said it better. Richard Barrera, let me pose that to you. What can the school district try to do to even out these inequities? I mean, you and I have spoken many times before. If government's role is anything, is providing for the people most in need in society, right? And so how can the school district try to provide for families who don't have means and aren't going to have access to these kind of opportunities?
So again, where we have to begin is, our obligation to our 105,000 plus students to get distance learning as successful as it can be in the circumstance that we're in, which is not being able to bring students back in person. So our number one obligation, and especially in a district with such a high percentage of students in poverty, a high percentage of students who are learning English, students with disabilities, all of the sort of characteristics of our students and families, we have to think systematically first about getting distance learning right, being very clear that the best distance learning system will still leave so many of our students behind and will still create the kind of social and emotional issues that are putting kids and families under stress every day, and have been we're going on 6 months since our schools have been closed. So we have to focus on again, number one, how do we get distance learning right, given that that's the system that we're in right now? Number two, how do we start to bring students back to school in a way that is safe, but in a way that focuses first on the students who are most vulnerable from the crisis that we're in now? And then I think, thinking about ways that we can, as a system, provide support to our families to get organized in the way that families with greater means doing right now. That's certainly a challenge for us, and it's a challenge that we have to develop strategies for. But again, we have to remember that a school system that serves 105,000 students, where we're already making a transition to something that so few people in education have ever done or ever understood completely, which is a move to distance learning and all of the challenges that brings with it. We have to keep our focus on doing that as well as we can, including a focus on how do we provide quick, rapid support for families. So if a teacher identifies, look, I've got students in my class who I know number one, are struggling with even a place at home to participate in distance learning. Number two, I know that there are serious emotional, social, even mental health issues starting to happen with this student. We have to have rapid ability to get to that family and provide support. So I don't want to kind of give the impression that our system will overnight start to focus on organizing families into pods. The degree to which this crisis goes on and the degree to which that becomes something that is necessary for us to do, as a system, we will have to provide a support. And as Dr. Howard said, the only way that you could equitably across the school system put strategies, like we're hearing about from Alex and Betzy into place is through the public school system. But to move towards that focus, while we're focused on this enormous challenge of distance learning, again, it's something that we need to be thinking about, and we need to identify opportunities to work with community-based organizations and to work with partners to do. But I don't want to, create the impression that, as soon as the school year begins, we're going to be organized in pod, because what we have to focus on is educating kids, and right now that system is.
Thank you, Richard. So, Betzy, let me turn to you. How do you see this equity issue? How did you ultimately, you mentioned women in the workforce is a big motivating factor for you here. I mean, did you just see a need and know you needed to fill it and hope everyone else would just do the best they can too?
So I'd like to share a couple of things. I think one of the things that I struggle deeply with, and I don't know how much people really know about the Lawrence Family Jewish Community Center, so just indulge me for just 1 minute to explain that the Jewish Community Center is for everyone. You don't have to be Jewish, and we have every kind of human being that walks through the doors. Well, it used to be a lot more. Now it's very controlled because of COVID regulations, but walks through a door, and we've been serving the entire community for 75 years. To that end, I knew that we were going to have to charge a fee because it was a brand new program, and we were going to have to hire staff and support our staffing model to be able to do that. But in addition to building out the program, we also focused our attention on speaking to the exact things that Dr. Howard and Richard have alluded to, which is to making sure to the best of our ability that no one would be turned away for their inability to pay. We have challenges in the fact that locationally where we are, we're not serving the people that Richard and Tyrone are talking about, and we understand that. But what we've done is raise literally hundreds of thousands of dollars within our community to say that if you cannot pay the fee, you should still come, and we will help you to be able to do that. The JCC functions as a nonprofit, and therefore we have the ability to be able to reach out to the core donor base that supports us philanthropically throughout the year to make sure that the children that we need to serve to the best of the ability that can get here, we can. In addition to that, I'd like to say to Richard specifically, I think you've alluded to this now on a couple of occasions, and I think it's so true in this particular moment, that we have an opportunity for a public and private partnership that would be unprecedented under the circumstances. The JCC has been functioning in an open educational space. We have an early childhood center as well as our camp program that we've been functioning for the last 3 months. And we have a lot now of really practical, beyond just the strategic, theoretical places, but actual tactical and thoughtful information about how we were able to do that. Now, whether that will totally translate from our small group of 300 into hundreds of thousands of people, I get it's not directly transferable. But certainly there's some level of thought leadership and best practice where we can work together. I've spent a lot of time talking to colleagues both in the YMCA system and the Boys and Girls system to think about collectively if each of the community organizations that position themselves throughout the community could serve for that additional support to move a school system that serves 105,000 people is like turning a tanker. Turning the JCC is turning a tugboat. Turning the YMCA system is a little bit bigger of a ship, but probably totally able to happen, as I've had many conversations with my dear friend who's the CEO of the YMCA system, that there's so many ways for us to be able to fulfill the needs, and we need governmental support in allowing us to be able to do that. And there's a total willingness on the part of the organizations that I mentioned, and probably well beyond organizations like Alex's as well, that could offer opportunity in a way. And I know that there are groups of really philanthropic and thoughtful people throughout this community that would love nothing more than to make sure that the children that were in need of this the most would get it.
So Alex, let me go to you next. We haven't heard from you in a bit. Does that bring up anything you want to talk about? I know Tutors and Friends has tried to think about equity in its approach too, but just your thoughts.
Absolutely. So private tutoring has historically been on the more expensive side as far as getting students the help they need. And to go back to something I mentioned earlier, I didn't mean that K through 2 is not difficult material, but it's just not been requested for tutoring as much as some more complex high school subjects, like calculus or AP physics or those types of things. Our tutors love seeing students learn, and it's an unfortunate reality that we have to charge for our services, and unfortunately not every student is going to be able to partake in them. That being said, we do offer free Homework Help Friday, where any student is welcome to come on to our Zoom call and request help with their homework for up to 20 minutes at a time. We also make free instructional videos that we post to our YouTube page, which is the Tutors and Friends YouTube page. And we are looking to, in the future, to provide some sort of scholarship program where we can offer assistance to students who can't afford the group style learning. And we're willing to take any suggestions from the audience or anybody for that matter that might know how we might be able to implement some additional help for students who can't afford the tutoring.
So I want to go to Dr. Howard next. We're hearing about all these ways that the community is like jumping in and trying to make these things happen. When this pandemic started, did you think that this is the kind of situation we would ultimately end up in with schools in such a kind of dire, scary place?
I don't know that anyone really understood what we would end up with because of this pandemic. But one of the things that I think we're very clear about is the fact that when these kinds of issues occur, oftentimes the most vulnerable become even more vulnerable. And I think schools oftentimes sort of see where that is up close and personal. So I applaud the kinds of efforts that both Alex and Betzy talked about in terms of where private entities have sort of stepped up and provided supports and services. But this is something I think requires a much more robust enterprise between public, private, state, local, county. I want to stress the fact that if we don't do something more urgently in this moment, not just for San Diego, but for the other large counties across the state of California, that there are a generation of young people who we may never, ever help catch up in this moment. I say that because what we know is the following, that learning loss over the course of a summer oftentimes sets students back so far behind that they never catch up. This has been essentially 6 months of learning loss for some students. And then to the board members' point about the fact that while we are trying to do our best and that we should be applauding those efforts to help make remote learning work, what we have witnessed over the course of this pandemic is the number of families who are now experiencing homelessness has increased steadily. The number of families who have suffered evictions has increased steadily, despite there being a moratorium on that in certain parts of the state. So we're going to have a generation of young people who are not going to be able to compete academically. We know that for young people who do not graduate with at least a high school diploma, the likelihood that they end up incarcerated at some point in time increases dramatically. That means that we, the state, the taxpayers of California, will subsidize that because we are not acting boldly in this moment. We also know that in a city like San Diego, where we have to have these hard conversations about something like homelessness, we know that African Americans make up about 6% of San Diego's population, but about a third of the homeless population is African American. It pains me to walk downtown San Diego and just to see the clear racialization of homelessness that's disproportionately Black. If we don't respond in this moment today in a more thoughtful, creative, bold, and unapologetic manner for our most vulnerable populations, we'll walk down the streets in San Diego 5-10 years from now, and we'll see the collateral damage of what we didn't do today happening to our communities in the near future. And I maintain that we're going to pay one way or the other. We can pay through incarceration, we can pay through extensive social services, or we can put money on the front end to find ways now to help those families where we know children are experiencing homelessness. We know the disproportionate number who are in foster care. Many of these children that we're talking about have parents and caregivers who are essential workers. So they don't have the time to sit down with them and help them do homework. They don't have the time to sit with them and help them get tutoring. They are out providing the essential services that we oftentimes are relying upon. So I need to have us all continue to think about the collective ways that we can think about structural inequity and sort of the systematized racism that still plays itself out, that's continuing to affect large numbers of our students. So that's an uncomfortable conversation. That's an uneasy conversation, but we live in one of the most diverse states in the entire nation. If we can't tackle this issue, shame on us, because it not only has implications for San Diego. Let us be clear for a moment. This is not just a San Diego issue. We have to understand this. California is the 5th largest economy in the world, and San Diego is the 2nd largest economy in the state of California. So when this affects San Diego, not only does the state of California feel the effects of this, but the entire nation feels the effects of this. And dare I say, the entire global community feels the effects of this, because as California goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the world.
Well, Dr. Howard put an amazing point on just how dire the circumstances are for some students here. And I think all of us involved in the education field understand that summer can wreak havoc for some students as it is. And now we're talking about 6 months. Maybe we're going to be talking about 18 months with no school, which is just extremely hard to fathom. Richard, as you mentioned, your primary responsibility right now is creating an online learning module for 105,000 students. I don't think anyone doubts the enormity of that challenge. But, we've heard about things in other places. I read about a school district in Denver today that is really working hard to get pods going for the most vulnerable. In the UK, they're doing a tutoring core. I know you probably need more money, and feel free to tell us that. But what can you guys do, and what are you going to do for homeless students, where it's a class issue, it's a race issue?
Well, so a couple of things. Number one, the first group of students that we are focusing on to bring back to school would fall into this category of the students who are most vulnerable in a distance learning system. And so homeless students, students with certain special needs where, the IEPs of the student might require in-person services. And then again, more broadly, students who just have a very difficult time successfully engaging in distance learning from home for a number of reasons, including, everything from, parents needing to go to work to, the social and emotional stress that can build up in a family when you're in this situation month after month, to students I know in my district who, to the extent that they can, get onto their virtual classes, they're in a closet because their family is sharing an apartment with 2 or 3 other families. And so we first need to focus on how do we get those students back to school. Again, I think this idea of a systematic approach to helping families get organized to respond to this crisis, becomes the responsibility first of the school system. And then I so appreciate Dr. Howard's point, which is, and then from the school system, we have to pull in other governmental agencies, community-based organizations. I very much appreciate, Betsy's point about public-private partnerships, but to build a system that allows for every family to have the same opportunities, which is what the public school system is supposed to be, requires a massive response from the community. And I will, talk about money for a second, Will, as I always will. And to Dr. Howard's point, one big decision that all of us as Canadians will have an opportunity to make in just a couple of months is Prop 15, the Schools and Communities First initiative. And there is no clearer example of working to begin to dismantle the systematic racism that is built into our tax system, which then focuses on the lack of resources both for schools and for communities, like services for people experiencing homelessness, than a situation where the handful of large commercial property owners in our state manipulate the tax system and deprive Californians of $12 billion a year of money for schools and community services. So the first step that we'll all have as Californians is to vote the right way on Prop 15. And then we've got a long way to go after that. But at least we have to start to address the fact that in the fifth largest economy in the world, as Dr. Howard points out, we have one of the most shameful levels of investment in public education. And that's been going on for 42 years. And if we don't use this opportunity to confront, that issue as a state, then shame on us.
So the next thing I want to talk about is that a lot of the debate about going back to school or not has gotten increasingly more polarized, and people have thoughts about it that are more and more closely aligned with their political party, which is a terrible shame, I'm certainly willing to say. Would you guys like to see more nuance in this? Because everything I hear is, are we going to go back to school or are we not going to go back to school? But, we could bring younger students, potentially we could be bringing back sooner. Science, and people keep telling us that science is going to guide this, not politics. Well, the science says that K through third graders don't actually spread this nearly as much as older students and older people. Dr. Howard, do you want to weigh in on that one?
Sure. I want to sort of respond to your point, Will, but I want to just really reinforce something that School Board Member Barrera just said, because I think we place this unfair responsibility on school boards to fix this and to figure this out. And I just think that's grossly unfair, because schools did not create these conditions that we find ourselves in, yet we expect schools to fix them. And we don't put the resources in place for them to be fixed. California used to have one of the best education systems in the entire nation. We now rank 41st in the nation in per pupil spending. We cannot say we want a first class education, but yet we're in the bottom 10 of how we fund schools. So I just wanted to thank School Board Member Barrera for bringing up the issue of money and how we have to do a better job of supporting our schools. If I can respond quickly to your question, Will, I think we do have to nuance this more, because the bottom line is this: remote learning, whether or not we like it or not, in some form or fashion is here to stay. I think we have figured out how this method, while it doesn't work for many families for the reasons that we have spoken to, the reality is this, that remote learning is working for many students that are out there. For students who have social anxiety challenges, for students who are more introverted, this has been a godsend. They are thriving, they are doing well. So I think even when we find a vaccine, when students are back in the brick and mortar places called schools, some form of this approach to teaching and learning will stay with us. So I think we have to continue to refine it, to make it better, to help support our teachers so that they can become more comfortable with it. I think it should still be an option for those children who prefer this as an entity for learning, if their family circumstances allow that. But at the same time, I do think that we have to continue to make sure that safety is the number one priority for our students. I just think that while there's been lots of politicizing, lots of polarization, as you mentioned, Will, about do we come back to school? Do we not come back to school? Do we have a hybrid model? We need to bring reasoned people who we're able to look at data in a fair, thoughtful manner and say, what is the number one priority for all of us here? It should be the safety of our young people, number one, but also the safety of all the adults who support them. That means teachers, that means administrators, that means support staff, that means janitors, that means nurses, that means all the folks who are part of the school community who are also a part of this process as well. So we can't just look at this solely from the standpoint of our students. They are our number one priority, but schools are communities, and that ecosystem is comprised of lots of other people who would be putting their lives potentially on the line, jeopardizing their health, all to support our students.
Well, I loved what you said about how this might change the future, and surely it will in ways that we don't understand at all yet. Alex and Betzy, Alex, do you think that going forward, even coming out of the pandemic, this kind of revolution that no one wanted that's been happening, do you think it could affect your business? Do you think it might mean you have a bigger role to play going forward now that more education may be going online?
Absolutely. And in response to what Dr. Howard said, distance learning is working well for many students. On March 13th, we moved all of our lessons to a Zoom platform, and they went really well for many students. Prior to that, we were only doing in person. And so I think that definitely going forward, there's going to be a large population that's going to continue with online learning of some sort, and especially online tutoring. It definitely works well for people who don't feel as comfortable in an in-person setting or like the comfort of their home as well. And absolutely, we've had an increase in just requests for tutoring in general since distance learning occurred, which I think partially has to do with students not being accustomed to learning online, and also just partially has to do with the fact that it's now accessible. They don't have a regular schedule that they have to be in their classes at, and they can do their learning on their own time. So
what do you think, Betzy? Do you think the Jewish Community Center is going to be even more involved in helping kids with school than it was previously?
Well, we focused almost entirely our work around early childhood education, which is key and critical to the steps for people to have a solid foundation moving into a K through 12 school environment. And that's where we will continue to stay focused. I think where the Jewish Community Center really has an opportunity to do recognizing the place of privilege that we function from and using it to both Richard and Tyrone's point to influence and be able to support the change that needs to happen in San Diego is the most critical piece of the values-based system that the JCC is born from. And so what I would like to leave people with the notion of the things that we have learned and we understand of functioning under this pandemic is what it takes to create collaboration beyond crisis. And I see a real opportunity within our system, as well as the systems of other community-based organizations that have resources to be able to inform these decisions and support vulnerable people, as an opportunity for us to extend our wings into serving the broader community of San Diego in a very important and meaningful way.
Richard, does it worry you what education might look like in the future after we come out of this?
No, well, what worries me is the impact that our students are experiencing right now. And, what Dr. Howard talked about is, that everything from the instructional loss to the social emotional issues that students are facing, it just becomes more difficult and more expensive to try to deal with those issues, having seen them already take place, than having our students back in school where we can be focused on prevention. But having said that, there are fantastic opportunities that can emerge from this moment. Number one, I've never seen such strong support in our communities for public schools, and everybody, I think every parent in this community right now has a deeper appreciation for the role that teachers play every day. And I think the understanding that we're all in this together, I've never seen such a level of kind of recognition, for that. So number one, I'm very hopeful that in this moment, San Diegans and Californians will step up and say, no, we need to double down on our investment in public schools and community services, and all of the issues Howard also talked about is affecting our families outside of the school system. The city council, to its credit, just passed an extension of the moratorium on evictions. We're seeing a real sense of awareness and responsibility, to the families that that our public schools educate every day. And I think that creates a different kind of conversation that we can be having going forward. And then in terms of innovations, I think, Will, you've probably covered here. One example, we had 7 students who wanted to sign up for an AP calculus class at Lincoln High School, and we couldn't provide the class because it was too few students. Well, now what this creates an opportunity to is we can create AP calculus classes or other classes for students across the district who can come together, through an online platform, and immediately start to, make a real dent in the inequities in access, across our system. The fact that we have now trained every teacher in our district in distance learning can only have positive benefits, moving forward. So yeah, there are all sorts of opportunities to seize this moment and make our system better going forward. And I'm actually very optimistic that we're going to be able to do that.
Dr. Howard, let me get your response to that, to the kind of reasons for hope we might see here. One thing that struck me is that we've heard in education for a long time that teachers aren't valued enough here, and that really elevating the profession is one way to help all students succeed better. Do you see that as a reason to hope, or other potential things?
Yeah, we have to try to maintain some level of optimism. We have to try to find the silver lining in the dark cloud. So I appreciate Richard's point about sort of the ways we understand that we're training teachers in ways that we would have never trained them before. Alex's point about the fact that this is working for students more so than we ever imagined. But while I have some hope and I want to be hopeful, I do have some guarded concern, because to the points that were made earlier by Betzy, Alex, and Richard, one of the concerns we have is obviously the learning loss that students are experiencing. But I'm equally as concerned about the social emotional concerns and the depression and the social anxiety and the social isolation that students are experiencing in this moment, because this has been hard for lots of students. For many of our students, school is the consistent place. School is the consistent set of concerns that they have addressed by adults that they are cared for. That is the sort of the safe haven for far too many students. And that has been snatched away from them for the past 6 months, and it could be longer. And so what's going to happen is that ultimately when our students do come back to school, while the focus is going to be on learning loss, I ask that we not forget about the social emotional well-being of our students. But what's going to make this even more challenging is that many districts and many states are going to see cuts in budgets because we just have had significant loss of state revenue. So at a time when our schools are going to need more to help the social, emotional, academic needs of our most vulnerable populations, they're going to be asked to do that with less. So I want to hope and I want to pray and remain hopeful that the very people who now seem to really appreciate the importance and the value of our teachers are not reluctant to do what they have to do politically to support public education. Politically to support bonds, politically support initiatives, politically to make sure that the very support we're showing now in terms of our voices, it also translates into support with our votes to make sure that schools don't have to make these difficult decisions when they have to provide more to students with less in terms of revenue.
So we're right at the end of the panel, but I got to put this last question to Richard. Is the school district up to the challenge of meeting the urgent needs of this moment that Dr. Howard laid out? I mean, it is dire, and you know that, Richard. You represent a district with a lot of vulnerable people in it. This school district does turn very slowly sometimes. Is it up to the challenge?
So, Will, I mean, the conversation about, sort of a large school district versus, smaller entities. And look, I mean, we turned overnight into a distance learning, system for all kids. I mean, we did that overnight. And in the process, we're now up to nearly 4 million meals that we have served since the closure in our food distribution at the schools. We distributed 53,000 computers to our students and hooked them up to the internet. An entire operation that we had never done before. So yeah, it's hard in a big system, to move things, but we, of course, I believe, are up to this challenge, and we've demonstrated an ability to meet this moment. But the moment hasn't ended, and there's a lot bigger challenges in front of us. But we have no choice than to step up and meet this moment, and I know that we will.
Well, I want to thank you all so very much for coming and talking to all the people out there with me. We can't see them, but I know they're there. I know Dr. Howard has to go. It's been so amazing having you with us. And now Scott and I are about to go into some breakout rooms. I think Scott's going to describe that. Dr. Howard, if you need to get off, go for it. But thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Scott. Betzy, thank
you.
you for your work. Alex, Richard, appreciate you all.
Thank you, Dr. Howard.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a fascinating discussion. That's one of the best panels I've ever run. I think that I wasn't a part of it was probably the key. No, really interesting stuff. There are so many comments and so many people want to keep the conversation going. That's what we're going to do now. I did have an update I'd heard this morning from the YMCA, which hasn't actually announced its program. We've all been kind of waiting to see what they would do. They're still trying to figure out where they're allowed to go, what they're allowed to launch, when during the day they're allowed to be open, all kinds of things that are interesting there. But they are raising a bunch of money to try to provide a bunch of scholarships for people to be a part of that. They ran at about 15,000 kids a week that they used to take care of in the kind of camps that my kids have been a part of for a long time. They think that'll be a lot less, but they're really raising a bunch of money to make it possible for thousands of kids to be involved. So we'll see and try to track that. Hopefully they'll have some news and information for a lot of people that'll be interested in that. So we're going to break off. I will be hosting a discussion kind of about any of your questions about what's actually happening, what we know is happening. And if I can't answer the question, then I'll pass it along to one of the people who work to find things out like that. And then Will is going to take the conversation and go a little bit further, I think, on equity in his chat. You can find that in the CVent. And we will also post the links here if for some reason you can't find that in the CVent platform. Thank you again to all the participants, Alex, Betzy, Richard. Great conversation, and there are a lot of people who want to weigh in more. So if you could break off to those links that we provided in the chat, that'd be great. Will, good job.
Thanks. I was a little nervous, but
No, you're great. That was awesome. All right, we'll break off now. And wait, I have one last thing. Remember, PolitiFest is September 29th through October 3rd. Tickets go on sale August 17th. You can get tickets at voiceofsandiego.org/PolitiFest. All right, now let's go to those different rooms. And thanks again, everybody, for participating.